So now the topic is role of laser PA in pigment dispersion syndrome and microspheraphakia. I just see a small case report. We have a 39 years old gentleman came with history of halos, pain, and irritation in both eye. He had a family history glaucoma in the mother. His IOP is 26 and CCT is 624. A conioscopy shows wide open 360 tense T pigment 2 plus with concave angle recess. These are the disc finding in right and left eye, something around 0.6 to zero point 0.7, and let the inferior notch inferior in the right eye. And so we HFA and OCT appears to be normal. So we diagnose the pigment dispersal syndrome in both eye and what to do next. So the impact of pigment dispersal syndrome glaucoma in disease affect mostly young white myopic male. The prevalence around 0.5 to 5%, and males and highly prominence in this pigment dispersal syndrome and glaucoma. So look at the pathophysiology. Basically, we have cucumber spindles at the back of the cornea. We have translucent defect of mid-peripheral of the iris, increased pigmentation because of anomalous iridozonular contact leads to pigment dispersion throughout the anti-segment and also the angle. So basically you have deep anterior chamber, the posterior incision of the iris, the concave iris configuration along anterior zonules. It's called reverse pupillary block, which is very well told by Campbell, and it's exacerbated during blinking, accommodation exercise. The increased iridozonular contact and friction, the release of pigment in the aqueous. And this pigment deposits in the angle initially clogs the trabecular meshwork and gradually leads to a destruction of the trabecular endothelium and collapses the trabecular meshwork beam, leading to elevated intraocular pressure. So basically you have reverse pupillary block, and during a blink, the pressure goes, some fluid escape from posterior chamber to anterior chamber, causing an pushing of iris backwards, such as the zonules, releasing the pigment, and again pigment release and causing a glaucoma. How often does pigment dispersion convert to glaucoma? There's roughly around 25 to 50% of patients with in the pigment dispersion syndrome, the risk of developing ocular hypertension later. This is some of the studies, the rate of conversion of pigment dispersion syndrome to pigment glaucoma in literature. They're roughly around 15 to 50%. So some say 15% like Scott study and Siddiqui study, and there are up to 50% in Ferrer study. If you look at this graph by Yasmin Siddiqui, the risk of developing pigment glaucoma from pigment dispersion syndrome, the study that are only a 10% conversion at the age of 5 years, and it is only 15% at the age of 15 years. But same time, if you take intraocular pressure and Kaplan-Meier, if you have the pressure of more than 21, the risk become double. It become 20% in 5 years and become 40% in 15 years. So how does a PA works in PDS? This is basically going to reverse the pupillary block, and this is very well told by Karikov in 1992 in ophthalmic surgery. So what does PA do? PA equalizes the pressure between anterior and posterior chamber and reduces the posterior connected to the iris, reduces friction between iris and zonules. And basically, there's a friction, and once you do a PA, the anterior and posterior chambers pressure become equal. How laser PA affect the configuration of iris and anterior chamber angle? What is the effect of laser PA and IOP? Does PA prevent progress on visual field? These are the questions. There's a lot of literature review done. There are 6 RCT and 2 cohort studies in this literature review. The goal is to review the effect of PA and PDS and in glaucoma, pigmented glaucoma. This studies are basically for pigment dispersal syndrome. You have Kadalifi in 2 studies. Then you have a study by Scott et al. Then you have a study by King et al. Describing about the pigment dispersal syndrome converted into PDS. So the effect of PA and anti-symptom angle, basically the UBM shows greater flattening of iris in the PA group, and A associated decrease in chamber volume and significantly decrease the iridocorneal angle, especially in a post-PA. So the effect of PA and IOP in pigment dispersal syndrome in Quint et al. Studies is statistically significant lowering of IOP post-PA. In Scott et al., no benefit of PA in progression from PDS to with ocular pigmented glaucoma in 3 years of follow-up. And Catalli et al. IOP stability was found in 14% in PA group. Assisted group of the control group had rise of IOP more than 5 mm mercury in 10 years of time. So this study from European Glaucoma Society shows that in a patient with the pigment dispersal syndrome, the most significant ocular risk factor for conversion to glaucoma is an IOP more than 21 mm mercury of presentation, other than any other factors like family history, factor of the age, degree of pigmentation, confused ratio. So this case, I told you our case is on 13 years old man, pressure is 26, CCT is 624, family is glaucoma, and this finding and has a TCCD dense pigmentation. So we done an UBM, and UBM shows an posterior biome of the iris and close proximity of the anterior zonal bundle with posterior iris narrow touch. So we decided to do PI, and post PI he had a pressure of 36 and 42. Because we can have steroids for a week, 4 times a day for a week in the post-op. We suspect a high steroid responders. We stop the steroids, and after a week, the pressure is 18 without any medications. So to conclude, PA seems to have decrease in biochemical factor in iridocortical contact. The effect of PA in IOP lowering also not proven convincingly. There's no clear demonstrated benefit of doing PA in terms of visual field focus, especially in a pigment dispersion syndrome. So come to microsphere, second talk of microsphere again, the small, the rare entity in Weill Murchison syndrome, a small spherical crystalline lens with increased anterior posterior thickness, reduced equatorial diameter, is bilaterally useful. It is bilateral, usually is bilateral. And glaucoma in the spherophakia, especially the lenses, spherical lenses, lead to a pupillary block because of lens will be moving up and down. A second angle closure. The correlative angle with the spherical lenses, the angle abnormal because of the agenesis of the angle structures are the other mechanism reported. And PA may be beneficial in presence of closed angle with the lens subsection in R arise in IOP secondary pupillary block. And this study by my friend George in Madurai, they saw the glaucoma development in 44% of the cases and 72% underwent PA. And only 8 eyes did not require any surgical and medical intervention other than PA during the follow-up. And the evidence increase, there is an incidence of glaucoma in the study is high 44% despite the presence of patent PA. The hypothesis that many of these patients had already developed peripheral anti-cyanic and angle closure before PA was performed. My colleague Sirisha Sendil has also done a study on this glaucoma microspherophakia, and they studied the glaucoma diagnosis 15% eyes in the study, and 89% developed glaucoma age less than 30 years. 16 eyes out of 40 have closed angle underwent PA. Out of 16 eyes, 2 eyes did not need any additional treatment, and 3 eyes required additional glaucoma medication. 10 eyes requires the glaucoma surgery to control intraocular pressure. 1 eye required lensectomy. And to summarize, a laser peripheral iridotomy in the first step in management of pupillary block in the second glaucoma in microspherophakia. And pupillary block is not the only mechanism causing raised IOP, hence doing PA alone may not be sufficient. So periodical gonioscopy is essential in the follow-up. And I conclude microspherical patients must be closely monitored and further treatment planned accordingly. Thank Madhavi for helping me with this. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Mohiuddin, for explaining these situations with the clinical examples. We can have a quick comment from Dr. Murali. What would be your indications for YAG-PI in PDS?
I think that as Dr. Mohiuddin pointed out, thank you, Dr. Sushma, and regards to all on the panel. The need for doing a YAG-PI in pigment dispersion remains a difficult topic to answer, and we cannot really universally say that every patient you pick up with pigment dispersion needs a YAG-PI. So I think you need to judge between how early you pick it up and how late in the disease you're seeing it. And as a habit, I know I do not do YAG-PIs in pigment dispersion because I don't really believe it helps. We do see patients quite late in the disease, and I don't think personally the YAG-PI is actually helping much unless you really pick it up very early in the disease.
Thanks, Dr. Murali. So basically, it's not a straightforward decision. Maybe UBM and ASOCT can guide us in certain situations when to do a PI in